Hello, all you wonderful people in YouTube land, from border to border and coast to coast in distant lands, and on all the ships at sea. We are the Non-Profits, and we are so happy to be here this week. The Non-Profits is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. You can support us at Patreon at patreon.com/the-nonprofits. And if you have any comments about today's show, you can email us at nonprofits@atheistcommunity.org. radio@atheist-community.org. Today, we're going to be talking about the statements from the Pope, talk about some social workers in Texas, and we'll find out where we are on the Dunning-Kruger effect curve. But first, let's introduce everybody who's here. Phoenix, tell us about yourself.
You may, for regular viewers of ACA programming, you may recognize me from the Atheist Vanguard. I've only recently been added into the lineup with Non-Profits, getting just one episode in before COVID hit us. I'm glad to be back for the reboot of the series. I mostly just do meet. Aside from that, I usually just do meet and greet and help manage the library.
And we have someone new here for the first time too. Rudy, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rudy B. I have a YouTube channel called X-Cult Baby. That's kind of my main thing. All of my social media is pretty much X-Cult Baby at this point, but I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I make videos about Jehovah's Witnesses and about atheism and skepticism and social issues, and just give my commentary here and there. I've also been on one episode of Talk Heathen. I've been on a few episodes of Secular Sexuality, and this is my first time on the Non-Profits.
Yay, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And I'm Puck. Usually I just kind of show up and sometimes they throw a camera on me. I was on Non-Profits for, twice now, I think twice. And they put me on Truth Wanted a couple of times also. So it's great to finally see you guys here. I think it's fantastic that one of the silver linings of the COVID situation is that we're able to bring in a whole bunch of people from all over the country here. It's not just a whole bunch of people from Austin sitting around one table. Our table just got a lot bigger.
Mm-hmm. I should say, I forgot to mention, I was also on an episode of Truth Wanted. Totally forgot about that. And my pronouns are they, them, just so you know.
Oh, thank you. All right, well, let's get right into the articles. Let's go into the first one here. Phoenix, you got this one?
All right. So Pope Francis endorses same-sex civil unions for the first time in his papacy. This is from the WBUR, a Boston's nonprofit radio news station. For the first time in his papacy, Pope Francis has endorsed same-sex civil unions and called for legal protections for same-sex families. He did so while being interviewed for a documentary film called Francesco, which premiered today at the Rome Film Festival. Time magazine reported that in a sit-down interview for the film, the Pope said, "Homosexual people have a right to be in a family. They are children of God." And it continues to go on to say that their lives should not be made miserable because of this, and that we need a civil union law. The implications of the Pope's statements are unclear, as there's a difference between interview remarks and official church teaching. We take listener calls and discuss the implications with Thomas Groom, professor of theology and religious education at Boston College and past director of the church in the 21st Century Center. He's also the author of Faith for the Heart, Catholic Spirituality. We're also joined by Marion DeBook, executive. Okay, this is we don't need that.
Yeah. So what's the meat here? So basically during a documentary, the Pope made a statement about same-sex unions. Right. Now, growing up in a Catholic family, I can give you kind of my family reacted to this. My sister, who's a little bit more on the libertarian side anyway, says that it's kind of cool that they at least issued a not negative statement about gay families, and my parents, who are deeper into the Catholicism rabbit hole, they did make it a point to say that this is different from a papal statement that actually goes into canon. That this was something that he says we'll call it while he was not playing the role. And oh boy, do I have some things about that. But Rudy, what was your big takeaway on this?
What I got from it is, something that growing up a Jehovah's Witness, I feel like I've seen a lot, which is basically this sort of move towards Christians basically still holding the same views, but kind of trying to sugarcoat it, soften the words, soften the language. Like, okay, we're not going to go around calling gay people abominations or anything like that. But we're not going to give them like marriage, because that's not, they still don't see same-sex couples as, being able to have a legitimate marriage. A civil union is the best that the Pope is going to give them, even just in offhand comments in an interview. I mean, and of course, even if that were the case, the Catholic Church isn't going to accept that anytime soon. That's definitely not going to fly on any official level. It's kind of meaningless outside of that. And, at the end of the day, there's still this big separation between what a civil union is and what marriage is, at least, in the eyes of a lot of religious people. If it has marriage is holy. Marriage is this sacred union, and a civil union is just, well, legally these people, are together.
I find it amusing that they stress that, the marriage thing when earlier the church actually urged parishioners not to get married, that it detracted from the worship of God. So, then they went and changed their opinion on that. So
Yeah, and
they
have
love to flip positions.
Yeah, and I have a feeling they're going to continue to flip positions over time. Obviously, even just saying that LGBT people are children of God is a step in the right direction, but it's still pretty far behind, like everybody else.
Okay, so I grew up in a Catholic family, and I was born in 1979, so most of this happened before I was born, but it was not that very long ago when all Catholic masses would have been in Latin. No women were allowed to serve, and the mass was actually done toward the choir, not toward the congregation. These and a lot of other changes only happened actually fairly recently, but enough time has gone by that we have young Catholics who never knew that. They never grew up under that. They've always been able to be altar servers or work in whatever capacity they want to as women, and they just were never aware of that kind of history. So it doesn't seem like that much time has to go by. Of course, you're going to have some older adherents who say who are going to be really standard and traditional. Like there's some people in my family. I was not married in a Catholic church who would not consider me and my wife really married, right? And we're a straight couple and we're not really married. So it's I love what you said about it being a step in the right direction. And we've seen a lot of churches kind of have this split, right? Like, was it the United Church of Christ a few years ago had a big split whether or not they're going to endorse gay marriages. And then there was a huge division within the church on that one. So I get that this is a step in the right direction, that they can't move too far from fear of alienating their base. What do you guys think would be the next good step?
Well,
I mean, short of legalizing it.
Before we even go there,
please.
I have to point out that I looked into this, found a response from the Catholic News Agency. Apparently, this isn't as much of a step in the right direction as we're led to believe by the documentary, because apparently this statement is actually pieces of multiple statements pieced together from a previous interview done in 2019. And so the part of the statements was homosexual people have a right to be in the family. People with homosexual orientation have a right to be in the family, and parents have the right to recognize that son as homosexual, that daughter as homosexual. Nobody should be thrown out of the family or be made miserable because of it.
Someone should have told that to my parents.
Oh.
So yeah, that at least that's a step in the right direction, but that is not quite the civil union thing that's being addressed. When they do, when they say to continue, he says, when I said that, what I said is that they have a right to a family, and that doesn't mean to approve of homosexual acts, not at all. So they're just saying you don't kick them out of the house just because they're gay. That is basically all he's saying there. And when it comes to civil unions, apparently, the word used, convivencia civil, while it can be translated more or less to civil unions today, apparently they have a slightly different definition here. And their definition for this particular term, as clarified by who was this? Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez. He was stated that that before Pope became the Pope, he was stated always recognize that without calling it marriage. In fact, there are very close unions between people of the same sex, which do not in themselves imply sexual relations, but a very intense and stable alliance. They know each other thoroughly. They share the same roof for many years. They take care of each other. They sacrifice for each other. Then it may happen that they prefer that in an extreme case or illness, they do not consult their relatives, but that person who knows their intentions in depth. And for the same reason, they prefer that to be prefer that it be that person who inherits all their assets, etc., etc., etc. This can be contemplated in the law and is called civil union or law of civil coexistence, not marriage. So their definition is different from what we're going for.
Okay, so they're basically just endorsing the civil union, but not going out there and trying to. Okay, so the weird thing about, like, I grew up Catholic and then I became Mormon. One of the things that they both have is a person, like a head person, like the Pope, and in the Mormon Church they have the prophet, right? And for both of them, they have this weird clause where sometimes the person who is the Pope or the prophet is only human too, and sometimes says something and it's out of turn and it's to be amended, or it doesn't speak for the Catholic Church. And then sometimes they are speaking as the mouthpiece of God, and what they say is official and goes in the books. The Mormons believe in a living gospel, so they continue to write in their books as they go. This has always been one of those things that kind of stuck with me. It's like, why?
Yeah.
How can you tell the difference when they're speaking as a human and when they're speaking as the prophet? What does that even mean?
Yeah. This is one of those weird things because the Pope has two hats. He has the position of the Pope, where he is the mouthpiece for God, and he has the position of being the King of Vatican City,
head of state, right?
Yeah. So it's just always assumed that he's speaking as king, not as the mouthpiece for God, unless, of course, the cardinal, the Council of Cardinals, all goes in and says otherwise. So it's weird how the whole thing works out, because he'll say something, everybody takes it as him saying it as the mouthpiece of God, and then the council comes in and says, no, he did not say that on behalf of God. He's saying that as the king. And they just they backtrack if anything bad happens.
So, Rudy, we were talking about next steps and how this almost doesn't seem like one. What would be a good, meaningful, of course, we know what we want the end solution to be, but what would be a good enough step in the next direction that we could all nod and say, okay, I appreciate what you're trying to do, and let's start working together now. You're no longer someone who's working in opposition. We're starting to be on the right track. What could they do other than just make a statement to show more support to the community?
I think that marrying a gay couple in a Catholic church would be a good start.
I'd go straight to the Vatican and do it there.
Yeah, wow. It's like I can't really think of. I mean, they're at the step right now where they're trying to say, well, we're not hateful, and the Pope's statement of, they have a right to a family, that's barely even saying that you shouldn't kick your kid out. It's just that you don't have to. Like, that's not required of Catholics. You don't have to kick out your gay kid. So they're already at a pretty weak spot for, being allies, being supportive. They have a long way to go to get to, like, hey, this is not terrible. really just like all they really can do at this point is accept a same-sex marriage as a possible Catholic marriage, as an acknowledged marriage by the Catholic Church. That's really the only thing I think that they can do.
See, I work as a volunteer with a church, and I had for a number of years. They're a United Church of Christ, and they are open and affirming. They have a gay pastor, and most of the congregation, one way or the other, is in the LGBT community. But that didn't happen without its backlash. And there's still some, that's in I guess I can say that's in Kentucky, right? So you can imagine how much backlash there is for something like that to happen. It made a few headlines. But I continue to work with them because, this is a step this is a good step. I mean, I don't want to paint everybody who has a God belief into this category, because some churches are actually doing some meaningful good here. And can you guys think of examples of churches that have taken meaningful steps and that should be congratulated for it?
What is that church that the ACA often uses for a lecture hall? I believe it's Trinity Church. But they support LGBTQ. And they got a nice big rainbow flag right on the church building.
Mm-hmm.
I might be revealing too much about my TV habits, but the only one I can think of, there was an episode of Queer Eye where the guy that they were doing the makeover for was a openly gay pastor of his church, and to sort of support him, they sort of brought in to talk to him other pastors. One was openly trans, I think another one was gay, and they were sort of having this conversation about just being themselves and being proud and also supporting their congregation and all this stuff. And it was like, I was in tears. It was like, okay, I've been a religious person. I'm not anymore, but I know what this would have meant to me if I had seen it when I was religious. I know that if that was my pastor talking to me like that, that would have been extremely meaningful.
See, I don't really have these shared experiences, because when I was growing up, I grew up in Alaska, right? And there is no one strong religious community over there. It's a huge mixed bag. So the Catholic representation was there, of course, but a lot of other denominations had a say. It's not like some other cities in the country that are like Cincinnati is strongly Catholic, right? To the point where we have like 4 different Catholic high schools. But growing up, this was just never talked about, and maybe part of it is because I grew up in the 80s, and the whole idea of gay marriage was still so new, and we just still didn't talk about it then. But you guys might have more recent experiences than I have about how gay relationships are actually treated within the churches.
I don't really know. I haven't been involved with the churches in a very long time, but I do know that my grandfather, who just passed away a couple of years ago, and now my great uncle, who was actually most likely his partner, just never admitted openly. He just passed away, both in their early 90s. So, but yeah, they made it all the way into their 90s as a couple, and still closeted, and both very devout Catholics. So
the church that I left, the Jehovah's Witnesses, still pretty strongly anti-LGBT. Of course, they're all like, we're not homophobic. God's homophobic. We're just saying what he said. Like, that's oversimplifying it. That's basically their stance, is like, this isn't us saying that gay marriage isn't a real actual marriage. It's God. We're just bringing the mess. Yeah, so I've never had any kind of even remotely positive-ish experiences in that area, with at least not in the church that I grew up in.
See, it's a fun. I love gray areas, right? Like if I could, I would just wear a gray shirt, but it makes it look like my camera's screwing up. But we talk about a separation of religion and government, right? But marriage is one of those places where they both want to play, right? And a church will have some rules in it, like they'll say you have to be members of the church if you want to be married within the church, and fine, but then we asked ourselves, are they also bound by the same civil rights restrictions as businesses and other places like that? Are they considered a public enough place, or do we give them the protection to say, yeah, you know what, you are a church, you decide who you are going to marry? Because there are more restrictions than just it has to be a man and a woman, right? Some churches will require you to go to counseling and whatnot. So where do you think this lies? Where do you think there's a point that the government should be able to say, okay, you guys are part of the Civil Rights Code and you guys can no longer discriminate against gay marriages? Where do you guys think this should be?
Yeah, tough one. Because marriage and civil unions in this case are both legal classifications bestowed upon by the state, not the church. So when the church comes along and says, we don't want to recognize what the state is doing, it's like, well, sure, you may deny it all you want. You have the right to free speech and to deny reality, but they still legally have that classification as married or being in a civil union, regardless of what they say about it.
Right. Rudy, what's your take?
I guess I think that as far as the state is concerned, their only rules on it really should be, okay, we have 2 consenting adults, whatever. And then for the church, they really should have exactly the same restrictions. But on the other hand, as you said, obviously there are some churches where you have to be a member of that church to be married by that church, which only makes sense. But then, all the rules of being a member apply, and then you can't do this or that. But I honestly kind of think that's fine, because why would you even want to be married by a church that you're not a member of? So I don't know. I just feel like, legally speaking, it makes sense that churches should be basically legally required to marry anybody who is a member. And if they want to keep gay people out, as much as that sucks, hopefully that will also cause more churches to crop up that are supportive and affirming, and places where people can be accepted and still have their spiritual whatever that they want, and be part of that kind of community, but while still getting that. Like, I know that kind of comes off as sort of a separate but equal, and ideally any church would marry anybody, but that's kind of just unrealistic,
And yeah, and then it gets to the point where, like, they should be able to say that there are some restrictions that, like you said, just make sense, right? Like, you have to, and then the Mormon Church takes this to an extreme by saying that marriage ceremonies are held only in this one special building. Mm-hmm. And you must pass an interview and have a lifestyle check, basically, with people in leadership in the church before you're given the documentation to even enter the building. Never mind to have the ceremony. You can't walk in unless you have the stamp of approval. So yeah, there's weird little restrictions like that. And I've heard some horror stories about the kind of things that happen during these interviews. There's a lot of videos out there, so if you guys really want to dig into it, you don't have to take my word for it. Go listen to people who are out there publicly talking about the interviews that they've had. It can be a really harrowing experience to try to become a member of some of these churches. But I love these gray areas, right? These, like, we talk about separation of church and state, but there's weird places where they intersect. In our next article is going to be a little bit about this also. Phoenix, you are the well-read among us, so go ahead and give us because this is so breaking that between the time that I started researching this and reading into it, they actually added more to the story. So Phoenix, take us back to the beginning.
Okay, I'm just going to summarize this. So Texas Governor Greg Abbott recommended removing the legal code that prohibits social workers from turning away clients on the basis of disability, social orientation, or gender identity or expression. On October 12th, this recommendation was unanimously voted on and approved by the Texas State Board of Social Work Examiners, which oversees a host of regulatory agencies for professions related to mental health. The reasoning for the decision: the restrictions being removed from the Texas Administrative Code of Conduct for social workers aren't listed in the general provisions for social workers in the Occupational State Code. Of course, naturally, this led to a lot of backlash. Several of the responses we have Will Francis, executive director of the Texas chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, criticized board members for removing the non-discrimination protections without input from the social workers they license and oversee. Stephen Parks, a social worker in private practice in Houston who works with child trauma victims, noted that change was both a professional and a personal gut punch. That there's now a gray area between what's legally allowed and ethically responsible. That the law should never allow a social worker to legally do unethical things. Austin social worker Tracy Abzug, I hope I pronounced that right, told board members that it's actually quite disturbing to me that the Texas State Board of Social Work Examiners has agreed today to lower our standards as it relates to discrimination towards sexual orientation and gender identity. Responding to her comments, the chair of the Behavioral Health Council said she would revisit the issue, at least partially, at the council's next meeting on October 25th, where it promptly reversed the decision.
No, this is good. They worked that quickly, and whether it's because of public backlash or because they realized they made a horrible mistake, they did something about it. So this is what I was talking about. Like, I haven't really looked into this because this is the new part. So give us the quick bullets.
To continue real quick, just a real short bit left. Gloria Canseco, who was appointed by Government Greg Abbott to lead the Behavioral Health Council, expressed regret that the previous rule change was perceived as hostile to the LGBTQ community or to disabled persons, and was quoted as saying, "At every opportunity, our intent is to prohibit discrimination against any person for any reason." And for me, this is what the frickin' hell? You voted unanimously against something that was obviously discriminatory. It's just like, what the heck is going through these people's heads?
Any takes on this, Rudy?
Oh, I have takes. So, social workers are very, very important. Very, very important. I have had so many friends as a kid who were in dire circumstances because they were afraid their parents were going to kick them out of their house or something like that. LGBTQ youth represent as much as 40% of the homeless population in the United States. That is huge. Clearly, they are a group that experiences trauma and abuse. They're a lot more likely to commit suicide or engage in risky sexual behavior and drug abuse and things like that. They go through a lot, and removing these protections that are in place to ensure that those people are getting help with the trauma that they are almost certainly experiencing, I think that is directly a discriminatory, violent act. Like, there's no good reason to do that. I mean, what was their excuse? That wasn't in the state code for other things, so that we don't have to apply it specifically to. No, that doesn't make any sense.
That these things in the administrative code were not in the occupational code,
right?
But it's still state law.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not.
Like,
I'm not.
So no, go ahead.
Go please, Rudy. Let me not interrupt you. You have a lot to say about this, so go.
I have been a homeless LGBTQ youth, and I lived in a blue county. I lived in a very diverse city at the time, and I was not homeless for very long. I also never had to spend a night on the street. I was just couch surfing, but couch surfing is still homelessness because you still have all of the drawbacks. Like, I had to eat fast food exclusively because I had nowhere to store food. I couldn't make any because I didn't have ingredients ever. I kept having to cycle through the same 3 outfits because I could only carry so much with me in a go bag. and it was rough, but I was never worried about having resources available if I ran out of couches to surf on. Because of where I lived, those protections were in place, and the people there are largely accepting. But in a place like Texas, that is downright dangerous. There would have been direct and immediate consequences to the LGBT population who would be seeking help. And of course, I think it's almost even worse that they did that to the disabled community. I mean, what did they ever do to anybody? You've gotten religious justifications or whatever for LGBT people, but disabled people? Like, why?
And this is a board that's supposed to govern psychiatric care as well. For kind of the disabled includes people with psychiatric disabilities.
Yeah.
Okay, so allow me to play Jehovah's Advocate here for a second. And sorry, that was a cheap laugh. And try to actually look at this, because I sent you guys a note, and I'm sure it made you guys cringe a little bit, saying, there's something that I wanted to talk about here. Because I can imagine a situation where a place is desperately short on social workers and social services to begin with, right? And there's more work than can possibly meaningfully be done by the people who are here. And then the people who are already in there, I can imagine a situation where they're not necessarily the ones who are best equipped to work with LGBT families and communities. It takes a little while to get that education and knowledge. And I can easily understand why someone could feel, I'm probably not the right person to help. It's not that I don't want to help. It's that they can be better served by someone other than me. Should that be allowed? It's not the same as saying this person is transgender, I don't want to work with them. It's more saying this person is transgender, I know that I'm not the best person to give them what they need. So how do we find that fine line?
I think that should still be, I think that they still shouldn't be able to say no for those reasons. I would much rather if for example, my family kicked me out of my home at age 18, or I left home at age 18, and was not allowed back even when I lost my housing situation, for example, which actually happened. If I go to my social worker and I'm like, hey, I am homeless, I'm also gender fluid, polyamorous, and pansexual, it's like, I don't really care if they understand the intricacies of why I'm being kicked out. They are still a professional in that field. They still know what the resources are. Do they have all the resources that might appeal more specifically to my situation? No, probably not. But any ability to help is better than none at all.
Okay. So, and I guess that's something that I'm looking at this completely from the outside. So Rudy, I absolutely love that you're here. And most of this segment is going to be probably me and Phoenix looking at you for some guidance and saying, okay, you've actually been here. You've actually lived this. Help us out. Because, I'm looking at this mostly from a hypothetical point of view, right? Of saying, okay, if I was in charge of social services for a community, what's the best thing that I could do? And even if I did want to make sure that education and training was there for everybody, it could possibly take a number of years before it gets to everyone in a state the size of Texas, right? I mean, there's a lot of outlying communities, and it's hard to make a standardized system for everybody to learn everything that they need to learn. So let's go back to what we talked about before. Granted, we took care of the discrimination part, but what's the next step in actually being meaningful help? Not just in the okay, well, I know what services are available, but I know what I can tailor the services best to somebody who's in a special needs community. What's next?
Well, you've just gone out and bashed the community, then pulled back the decision. The next thing you could do is actually now put out an invite. Apologize and then put out an invite. Open door, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, come on in. We're here to help.
Yeah.
That would be the first step. Yeah,
first step, apologize for that bullshit. That was wrong. Let's just acknowledge that that was a terrible decision and move on from there by trying to do the exact opposite of that, which is, hey, what can we do to better serve the disabled? What can we do better to serve the LGBT community? Whatever that means for the people that are in those situations. If that means, I don't know, sensitivity training or things like that being, I don't know, part of the job, then that would be great. I guess I'm not sure what all of the things that could be done would be, but whatever is available, they should absolutely be trying to implement as soon as possible to try to help mitigate that major blunder.
Yeah, and I am so glad you guys are here, because social workers, to me, I know a couple of people who are in social work, and really that's the limit of it. I don't even really talk to them about what's going on in their jobs, like what they do. I hear things about house visits and write-ups, and that's it. So I'm glad I'm talking to a couple of people who have a better idea of what this all entails. So I'm not just doing it from a hypothetical sense. What do people like me need to know about the existing social workers situation? What don't we get that you guys who know more about it understand and wish that we understood too?
There definitely aren't enough social workers, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and some of them are literally putting their lives on the line for this. My sister was Child Protective Services. That still counts as social work right there.
Yeah.
And she had people actually threatening her and her family while she was doing that, and demonstrating that they didn't care about the law. But yeah, if you end up having somebody that has prejudices in that kind of field, a lot of those kids are in really, really bad situations, and to risk having not giving them help just because that one particular social worker doesn't like LGBTQ, or feels like they don't want to bother with working with kids with, say, Down syndrome, something along those lines. The ones that really, really need the help suddenly don't get it just because the person assigned to their case was a dick. So this is a big issue. It can have drastic results on a person's life.
There's also, I feel like, a problem with, at least that I have seen from the deaf community. There's a lot of deaf kids who are not being abused necessarily, but certainly neglected, because a lot of times the families don't even bother learning sign language. So they just don't communicate. They kind of just like pull their kids along by a leash and are just like, we're going over here. We're doing this now. Yep. You're going to wear this.
Yep, I don't know how to handle this, so I'm just going to do nothing.
Right. And because
it's ridiculous.
And since the kids can't really communicate, I mean, a lot of times they don't have access to adults who are concerned about their situation, who can also effectively communicate with them. Which I will say, again, as a former Jehovah's Witness, that was a point where a lot of ASL knowing Jehovah's Witnesses could step in and be like, we have a community that cares about you. Great way to get sucked into a cult. So just having more deaf resources, just people who just know sign language for the sake of knowing sign language, not because they have a deaf relative, but just to be able to communicate with a group of people who don't have enough people to communicate with besides each other oftentimes.
So what does this look like in a practical sense? Does it mean continued education for existing service workers, mandatory training even? It's popular to say something like even hairstylists have to do this, but even hairstylists have mandatory required yearly training, a number of classroom hours that they have to do to continue having their license. So is this what this looks like now, that there's mandatory training for working with communities with special needs?
I definitely
take the system from where it is and let's figure out what do we need to do and what can we do. That's the next question, so you can start bracing yourself for that. Like, what needs to be done, and then what can we the three of us start doing to impact this.
Yeah. Diversity and sensitivity training, that's definitely a start. But putting it, having the classes on it is one thing. Putting it into practice is another. Somebody can sit through those courses and then completely disregard them later on. Right. So, there's more to do than just tell them about what they're supposed to do.
Right. Making sure they're actually implementing those things.
Then some sort of I have to imagine there would have to be some sort of feedback system for this and some sort of oversight. I don't know what actually currently exists as far as oversight for home-based caseworkers. Like, who do you even complain to if you feel that you were the victim of some sort of discrimination? Where do you go for that? Yeah. What do you guys know anything about that? This would be something for me to look up, because if I was in need of a social worker, I wasn't very happy with what I got, and there's a legitimate complaint. I don't even begin to know who I'd complain to.
Yeah, to tie this statement and Rudy's earlier statement, when you put yourself into the shoes of somebody that needs help, they go to the place where they're supposed to be able to get help. They go to the social workers. And the person that they get assigned to turns them away or treats them rather snidely. They're just going to go, okay, apparently this place is not a place where I want to get help or can get help. So I'm just going to go wherever I happen to go and find it, and end up with like the Jehovah's Witnesses again.
Yeah. Cults often do prey on people who are in bad situations, otherwise have bad stuff going on in their life, and literally all they have to offer is just friendship. Like, hey, we will hang out with you. We'll buy you your groceries if you're in lockdown or whatever. We'll leave a little cash in an envelope at your doorstep if you're not sure how you're going to pay the rent this month. We'll go to the movies with you. All you have to do is sign a lifelong contract to Jehovah.
Didn't we just talk about that a couple weeks ago, Phoenix? About how there's some places that, yeah, sure, we'll give you a little bit of care, but then you're required to go to a church service once a week, or some other exposure to whatever is there. I don't know. It's a problem. It is, and I'm at a loss as to figure out exactly like what's the next meaningful step here. And thank you very much for bringing one up. The idea of just being friends to these people, right? To anybody who needs a genuine friend, and be that community, even if all you can do is say, you know what, let's just grab some ice cream. That's probably more than what some other people are doing. Probably better than the situation they were in. Is little gestures like that useful, or does it come across as like we were talking about earlier? It's like it's such a small step. It's not even really a step in the right direction.
Well, the thing is that with most people, you're in dire straits, whatever. Even if you're given a process where you can actually follow the steps in the process to get the financial help you need, to get the material things that you need to get by, all the stress and trauma is still there, and all it takes is a nice smile, somebody to say that they're there for you, that they're on your side, they're there to help, and that takes so much weight off of your shoulders, even if you don't get the financial help or the help with the material things. Just having somebody, knowing that there's somebody there for you on your side that actually cares, does so much for you psychologically that it makes the rest almost insignificant in comparison.
And something that I just thought of is when I was in high school, I had a friend who was depressed, suicidal, also closeted trans, just problems out the wazoo. And I was like, well, can't you talk to a counselor? And I kind of, in my mind, it seemed that simple. And it was like, yeah, my dad used to work at this school. If I tell the counselor's going to tell my dad. And even if I specifically ask him not to, and he promises that he won't, he will. And that only makes things worse. So it's I think something that would be helpful is just somebody else over their head to go to. just more than one option. It's like, if I can't get help from the social worker on this, can I go to somebody above them? Or if I feel like this wasn't handled properly, can I go to somebody above them and make that well known? Because like, we're all sitting here and we're like, yeah, if you have these problems, you get a social worker, and that doesn't work. I don't know.
Well, I have research to do, because this is a bigger problem than I was aware of, and I want to be able to do what I can, even in my limited capacity, to try to make some sort of improvement in my community. So thank you guys very much for talking to me about this. And now let's try out a new segment here. We're going to go into a segment called Looking Back.
Looking Back.
Rudy, why don't you take us into this one?
What?
Yeah, let's see what we got here.
I totally didn't write down the guy's last name, but he was a French guy, and his name was Émile, and
Emile Combs.
he was training to become a priest, and then he left the Catholic Church, apparently, and from there went on to be a huge advocate in France for Catholic Church state separation, because they were basically controlling the schools and what was being taught at the time. And of course, he was not very much liked by the Catholic Church for that. But something that I found interesting in all of this is that in the research that I did on the guy, he never really stopped being religious. He changed religions, but he was always a theist. And I think that highlights something really important.
He got into the Freemasons and also spiritualism, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. So yeah, he didn't maintain, Christianity exactly, but he didn't go to Freemasonry or spiritualism and just be like, that's what should be taught in schools instead. Not every religious person is like that. Not every religious person thinks that their religion should dominate the country the way that Christianity kind of dominates in the US. I think it's important that we, as people who are very invested in the separation of church and state, that we don't alienate ourselves from our allies who are theists. Because there's plenty of theists who have secular humanist worldviews and ideals, and we can agree on all of that stuff. And that's the really important stuff anyway. As we are advocating for the separation of church and state, and our allies are saying, yeah, I agree with that. No one religion should be making all the laws. And we turn around and go, no, not you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you all, not you. Like, that's not helpful. If we're isolating ourselves and being like, no, this is the atheist only club. I don't care what anybody else has to say. Even if you totally agree with me and you're fighting for the same things, I don't want to hear it. Like, that just is us shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, what's shocking to me about this, and the reason we're talking about this on this date, is because it was on November 8th, which is really close by, but it was only in 1904 that this bill was introduced in France. 1904, that's just a little bit over 100 years ago. That's recent. Okay, that's new. That's 100 years after the United States had the Establishment's Clause. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the quote-unquote battle for the separation, this isn't like some old archaic concept that, they figured out way back when. This is new. This is still happening. This is still live and in living color, right? This just put this in the books 100 years ago. It's that shockingly new.
We're fighting for 100 years later.
Yeah. Phoenix, what's your take on Émile Combs?
Well, I found out he did a lot in his administration. It's crazy. Not only did he do the whole separation of church and state and trying to pull the Catholic Church out of the public education system over there, but apparently he was responsible for reforming a 8-hour workday for minors, and or just a 10-hour day for many workers. Lowering the mandatory military service from 3 to 2 years, elimination of the certain middle class draft exemptions. he got public assistance for the chronically ill, disabled, elderly, and extended lots of safety standards all over the place. He changed pretty much everything he touched for the better.
Wow. Yeah. Sounds like a old French Bernie Sanders.
No, and I guess that like that's the shocking thing for me is that this is all coming from the theist side, and thank you very much, Rudy, for pointing out. It's like there are things that we're both working on together, and the separation of church and state seems like it's a no-brainer. This is something that we can all agree on. It's like, everybody stays out of everybody's way and just lets you guys be what you are. There are so many really weird, interesting overlaps, though. Like one of them is and my personal favorite. You mentioned schools, or the article mentioned schools, but I like the idea of chaplains, right? The idea that part of the it's an actual position in the military. The chaplain, the person who is responsible for the spiritual well-being of soldiers, especially those who are deployed. So the government realizes that it's probably a good thing to look out for that. But then how do you get into the idea that the government is paying someone to be a religious leader? Where are you guys on this? An actual religious person paid by the government specifically because of their religion.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I struggle with. I can see the arguments that they're providing, but I also just really strong that in the position that the government should not even be touching religion at all. But the argument that's provided typically is that having the chaplains there enables the soldiers to actually be able to practice their religion. It's if they didn't have chaplains with the restrictive environment that they're in, they wouldn't have access to chaplain services of any kind, clerical services of any kind without the chaplains. And so to enable them to be able to practice their beliefs, they have the chaplains in place just to be able to enable them the ability to practice. But yeah, you're drawing a real fine, a real shaky line in the sand right there, in a field of gray.
Rudy, any takes on chaplains or your favorite gray area?
What comes to mind first for me is that how many chaplains are you going to hire exactly, and from how many different religions? Because it's not like all of them are going to be of the same religion. They're not all going to practice the same way. Are you going to hire like a small group of pagans to meet on a regular basis to provide a ritual for a pagan soldier to be able to participate in? I mean, is that going to be a thing?
Actually, it is. Because I'm a veteran myself. And on Fort Hood, they have Fort Hood's Open Circle. It's not an official chaplaincy or anything. It's just a place where pagans are allowed to go and do their thing.
See, but that's the difference.
It is. Well, there's an issue with pagan ones because the population as far as pagan goes is really small, particularly when you divide it up amongst the varying beliefs. You're usually only going to find really small groups of probably no more than 30 people, on average at best. Usually they work in groups of like 5 or 10. They're real small, so it's kind of hard to create a organized, structured chaplaincy or any kind of program for pagans when they don't really have anything rigidly structured for them to follow.
So what I'm hearing at least though is they're not like, it's not like they're funneling everybody into one religious service in the name of one religion. If you need an imam, you can find one, or services for that. If you need the services of a rabbi, you can probably find that. Like, help me out, because I've never been in the services. I don't know anything about it. Are you able to find the spiritual leaders that you need?
The thing is that it's not advertised anywhere. I only found it when I started looking for myself. It's not listed on any of the maps or anything like that. When you look on a base map, no, but it's not going to be advertised anywhere unless they set up their own separate site or a meetup group or something like that. It's just that they got permission from the base commander to be able to do their thing at a particular location. There are open circles, that's what they're called, in several military bases, but it's not specific to any particular kind of paganism. Since the population of pagans is so small, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt on all of this, giving them the best argument I can. That because the population of pagans is so small and so varied amongst that small population, it's best just to let the ones that happen to be locally present. Here's a place where you can do your thing. Whoever is your leader, let them lead, do whatever, hold services or rituals or whatever you do on your own, in your own way. Just here's a spot for you to do it, because doing it structured in any manner, it just doesn't work when it's those small of numbers and that wide of variety.
So do you think it's a good thing, though, that the military at least looks out for the spiritual needs of its?
Well, the thing is that it's a toss-up, because while that is there, that's the best I ever saw for it, because I was ridiculed for my beliefs. I was psychologically tortured by my superiors all the way up to my first sergeant for 6 months. I was the base psychiatrists ended up labeling my personal beliefs as a personality disorder in a single session, no less. And got me chaptered out. But my first sergeant, instead of sending me home, transferred me to the troop with the highest suicide rate on base, where I was psychologically tortured by all three levels of my command, up the line of command, each one backing each other up, where they actually admitted that they were trying to get me out on a dishonorable discharge. And ridiculous, often actually engineered scenarios where I would have with conflicting orders, where I would have to fail to obey at least one of the orders in order to comply with the others. They were trying to get me out on a dishonorable discharge just because of they didn't like what I believed in.
So this is another hypothetical for me too. And again, now Phoenix, I'm glad you're here, because I've always wanted to know what it was like, in being part of active service and having spiritual needs, having religious beliefs that need to be attended to. And the interesting question then would become, is it more practical for the military not to have services in the name of separation of church and state, or to have services available because they understand the importance of it? I don't know where I sit on that one, so it's nice to be able to get all this information.
You have to understand the social environment in the military. It's basically you're locked in with the same people all the time, and if you don't fit in with those group of people, that just on a social environment level, you're going to be treated like shit if you don't fit in with them, because it's all of them versus you.
Rudy, what's your take on chaplains?
I think that from this conversation, I feel like if you don't have a paid chaplain for pretty much every conceivable religion on call, in the case of the pagan services, most of them don't have a leader. They just kind of have their private practice and then meet together for ritual. At least that's my understanding for a lot of pagan circles. So that's a little bit different, just because they don't necessarily need somebody to lead. They just need each other, or can totally do it on their own. But for religions that are more organized and have a religious leader, unless you're willing to get one of everything available, I don't think that they should be paying only a handful of religious people to be, or one religious person to sort of serve the spiritual needs, because they're not going to serve everybody's spiritual needs. If it's not if it's not blanket spiritual needs, if it's only Christian spiritual needs or Christian and Jewish spiritual needs, then they're still showing preference.
Yeah, they'll actually end up making it pretty much non-denominational. They'll have just a Christian chaplain, not any particular denomination, specified. You'll have the chaplain may be one denomination, but he'll be the chaplain for all denominations that fall under the category Christian. Same goes for the Muslims, and even Buddhism has one. But
I would argue that there's a lot of denominational Christians who would not settle for a non-denominational chaplain.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many possible ways we can get into this, and so many ways that we're still finding the gray areas for the battle between church and state. There's no way we're going to resolve it in this one clip, but we can at least say thanks to Émile Combes for doing his part to create that separation. So, all right, let's move on to that last article really quick here. Let's pull up my notes here. Oh yes, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Phoenix, what do you got about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
All right. So this article is a gentleman, I'm going to butcher his name, Jornar. He was spurred on by a comment from a random science fact post on Facebook. The QI elves, or quite interesting elves. He looked into, after being spurred on by this post, he looked into 3 papers critiquing the original 1999 Dunning-Kruger experiments. And it's kind of hard to understand everything because there's just a lot of information there. It's a rather exhaustive article. I think his conclusion could be summarized by that the pattern generated by the actual graph used in the original study happens to map very closely to what you would get when just random data is entered into the graph.
I guess my big takeaway from this is that we are on the Dunning-Kruger effect curve regarding the Dunning-Kruger effect curve. Right? We find out a little bit about it and we assume we know everything there is to know. We can talk about it. Now this is our slow descent, and we're going to take all of our viewers with us. It's no, there's more to it than this, because what I got from it is that there, the curve, if you want to call it that, for confidence relative to knowledge is not the shape that that we're all familiar with, the big spike, right? And then the swoop down, and then it goes back up as you get more knowledge. No, it turns out that people's confidence in knowledge on a subject and their actual knowledge on a subject, there's more correlation than they think. But then I think about this, we've all listened to other ACA shows, and we've all been in other ACA shows where we hear someone latch on to one fact and they feel like they know everything there is to know about the subject. Like on Truth Wanted, plug. As soon as someone says quantum mechanics, we already know that nothing meaningful is going to happen from this conversation.
Never go full on Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
You're going to eat those words someday, Puck, when somebody who's actually a specialist in quantum mechanics calls the show.
I welcome the opportunity. And how many times have we always said that? It's the quality of show is dependent on the people who call, right? If somebody who wants to call in who has a PhD in physics, yes, absolutely, come on in and tell us what's what, right? And I think every other host says that too. It's we're not experts in this field, except for those times when they bring in a guest who actually is an expert in the field and starts to talk about it. But yeah, what is it then if not the actual curve? Because we see people who gain a little bit of knowledge and assume that they know as much as they need to know about it.
Well, apparently,
so are we just interpreting this wrong, or is it really all just bunk?
Yeah, apparently that particular graph is from a different study on a different thing. The actual Dunning-Kruger graph is more like your confidence in yourself is more or less actually a straight line, whereas the skill level goes straight through it at an angle. So you're going to be highly overestimated at first, and then your skill level rises up to match it, then exceed it, but your confidence stays the same. So it gives pretty much the same effect when looking at it that way. So,
Rudy, quick take?
My take is that I've never really considered, I'll be honest, I never really believed that the Dunning-Kruger effect was like a real scientifically measurable thing, because when I hear it, I'm like, that just kind of sounds like a truism. That just kind of sounds like one of those things that people say, and it's like, I've seen that happen before, so yes, that is a law of the universe now. Like, to me, it's always just been one of those things. Yeah, it's like, oh, that's common sense. That just makes sense, because of course dumb people will think they know more than they do. Blah blah blah. Like that's just that's how I've never taken that too seriously. But especially now that I've become more skeptical, whenever I hear a truism like that, like there's one that goes like, no one is going to be able to love you if you don't love yourself. And when you hear it, you're like, yeah. But then if you actually think about it, it's like, no, that's actually wrong and terrible. How do you say that? There's lots of people who don't love themselves and are loved by many. That's totally just on its face false. And it's like when you think about it for more than a few seconds, it's like, that's probably not like true. That's like maybe sometimes true, kind of true-ish, true enough that if you say it, people will nod their heads. But like measurably true, no, not really.
Yep. So it's like true in the Barnum statement sense of the word, where
pretty much.
You say everybody knows that one person who doesn't know what they're talking about but acts like it. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they just assume that everybody's like that. We're all on this curve.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier about people that call into Truth Wanted, like when I read that about the Dunning-Kruger effect, when we read this article, the first thing that came to my mind was like young Earth creationists calling into Talk Heathen and AXP and just being like, well, the scientific law, something can't come from nothing, therefore God. And it's like, that does sound right. Something can't come from nothing. Okay. Like, but when you say it and you expect people to just be like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, no, when we're talking about logical arguments, you can't just say, yeah, that's a given. Of course. Sure. Why not? Like you can't do that. You have to actually scientifically measure it and say, is that actually true? And also, what is nothing? And what is this? And what is that? What does that mean? So when you take something like, if you know this much about it and your confidence is here, and it's like, yeah, but how do you actually measure that in real life? Really?
Okay, well, I can give you a personal example from me then. All right. I am a avid player of video games, and there is a very difficult game, if you guys have heard of it, called The Witness.
What's your console?
No.
PC, PS4, and Switch.
I thought you were going to say Dark Souls.
No. Final Fantasy, if anything.
I tried The Witness, by the way. I'm very excited.
So you know the game I'm talking about, and you know that game can get very difficult, where there are individual. Yeah, this is a rage-inducing game. If you ever want to test your relationship, forget about putting IKEA furniture together. Play this game. Okay, this will test your relationship. And the first time I beat this game, it took me 14 months. Okay, it was that complicated of a game. I learned the speed run for it because I hated the game so much. I wanted to destroy this game. I can now, and this is on the internet, so you guys can check it. I can beat this game top to bottom in less than 40 minutes.
I need to see this.
I'll send you a link afterwards. But here's the weird thing about me. I don't feel the least bit confident about it because, objectively on this leaderboard, I am one of the top 1% of players of this game ever in the world, right? But what do you think matters to me? The 99% of the people that I'm better than, or the 20 people above me on the leaderboard? I am not going to feel good enough at this game until I am sitting on top of there. And until then, if somebody says, are you good at The Witness? Even though I can objectively say, yeah, I'm never going to feel like I should say, yeah, I'm good.
Case of framing there.
Yeah. So maybe this says more about confidence overall, and that there are some people who, even with a little bit of knowledge, they'll present it with confidence. And even if a person has, and a different person might have like very little confidence like me, and always carry that through all levels of knowledge. Does this say more about people carrying their confidence regardless of their level of knowledge, do you think? Like maybe the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't have anything to do with knowledge compared to confidence, but maybe they're two completely different scales altogether.
I think that they're totally completely different scales, because I mean, if you watch street epistemology videos on like Anthony Magnabosso's channel, lots of people are very confident in things that, you know, when they talk about it, they might know nothing about, or they might have tons of apologetics in their pocket ready to go. Or they might just be like, I've thought about this and looked into this for a long time, and I still know next to nothing, but I've still done a lot of research, and I'm giving myself credit for that. I'm pretty sure, you know, like I think that it really doesn't have anything to do with knowledge necessarily.
Yeah. Like I'm new enough to call-in shows that I'm not beyond thinking that the next call is going to be someone that completely schools me on whatever topic they've decided to call about. Right. Even if you step in as an expert. No, I think we're all still learning, and everybody's going to say that we're all in the learning process. Phoenix, what you got?
Yeah, I'm always eager to learn. So somebody that wants to call in is extraordinarily knowledgeable on a particular subject, I'm all ears for it. But if they're calling in just to bash me over the head with how much smarter at it they are than I am, and it's just like, you're not teaching me anything. You're just here to gloat. Goodbye.
Right. And I guess another big takeaway from this is some people feel confident enough to teach even if they don't have an understanding of the material. And I think we've all gotten examples of that. So anyway, Phoenix, keep going.
Yeah, I have to be careful about this myself. I love to share the knowledge that I have, if you haven't noticed already. But if I'm not actually just directly quoting off of the information, if I'm going off of my memory, I'm going to tell you that, you know, this is the limit of my knowledge. That there, I'll put in the caveats that I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Or most importantly, is that one of the biggest things is that people will come and put two and two together on their own and come to a conclusion that they think is pretty obvious. I always I have what's called a eureka moment, what I call a eureka moment. There's probably actually a proper name for it somewhere. But when you've come up with this idea there where everything just gets, all these different questions that you didn't even know were connected, suddenly you've come up with this pattern, this one little single piece of information that, or concept idea that ties it all together, just blows your mind. You know, you become obsessive over it. You just, wow, oh my gosh, you know. And then you go and start talking about it as if it's factual. No.
Yeah.
You end up getting this false sense of security on your own knowledge because it blew your mind. And all you've done is you've come up with a cool idea and you stopped there. You didn't do anything to validate it at all. But just because the idea connects so many dots, even ones that you didn't even know to even consider connecting, you just go ahead and assume it. And that's one of the biggest things that I see all the time, religious and metaphysical circles, you know, is events like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's this thing. And when somebody learns a little bit of information on any subject, that little piece of information can easily do that for them. It'll be that one piece of information that they studied that they that connected a bunch of dots for them, and they created this construct that in your minds about it, and then just went to town with that, thinking that their conclusions were all true without actually continuing on their education and seeing if they were right or wrong. So
yeah, I fully agree with that. Totally been there, but I've also kind of had the opposite problem, which is like not realizing how much I know about something until somebody asks me how to do it, and I'm like, oh, just like this and this, and I'm like, huh,
wow, did I just
didn't know that I knew how to explain that. And I did this really recently with Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't realize that it took me forever to learn how to just make characters, like to build a character from scratch. And then I started DMing and somebody asked me how to do it. And I was like, I'll walk you through. Here, we start with this and this and this. And then I was like, huh. I guess
5e
I know how
makes
to
it
do
really
that
easy now.
Oh yeah, it's great.
This is D&D is a very different animal than it was when I first played in 1994. So
Which edition did you do?
Second. Okay, this is like ages ago, and I am absolutely sure that the neighbors that I played this game with were not doing it properly. The more I learn about the game, the more I realize that we were just making everything up as we went. It's like,
that's part of the game. DM's rules, man.
By the way, a nice bit of trivia information. If I'm not mistaken, one of the original hosts of the nonprofits, Jeff D, used to do artwork for Dungeons and Dragons.
Ooh,
that's cool. I'm gonna have to commission him to draw characters for me from now on.
Don't quote me on that. And I could be mistaken on whether or not it was actually Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm fairly confident.
Honestly, good fantasy art is good fantasy art.
Mm-hmm.
So what should we do? Especially because there are, we exist in spaces, all of us, where we need more advocates for our position and to be able to have people who speak out for what we believe in. We don't necessarily want them to have to wait until they have PhD level expertise. We want you to give your voices, right? Even if you're not fully confident, even though you're aware, you're still learning. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start speaking out about things they want to be an activist for, even if they don't have a strong knowledge base yet? Let's wrap this up with some advice to people who are just realizing they don't feel confident enough to speak.
I have lots of friends who have like scientific literacy type channels where they use their YouTube platform just to inform people about stuff that the rest of us might not otherwise understand, like Vice Rhino, Nervardia, Jackson Wheat are all people that I could think of just off the top of my head. And those people occasionally talk about things that they're like, okay, maybe this isn't my area of expertise, but I fact checked myself and here are my sources so you can fact check me, and just be honest about the fact that you could be wrong and give people the sources where you got your info so that they know that you're not pulling it out of your ass.
Yeah, and that's my thing too. Like, I go out here and I'm talking about these topics. Some of them I'm just barely starting on the research from. Send all your complaints to the email address on the bottom third, nonprofits@atheist-community.org. And I can't think of a single person who's been on an ACA show that doesn't go out there and say, if we're wrong, tell us. Right? Mm-hmm. Like we're not all beyond thinking that we could be factually mistaken on something. Let us know. And I think that you're right. Having that humility of saying, yeah, I'm going out here, I'm speaking about this because I feel strongly. Here's why, and if I'm incorrect, let me know. Phoenix, what's your advice?
Well, when somebody is first starting out, all they really have, they just transitioned over to this, then they have strong emotions on it, but they may not yet understand all the arguments. They've heard the arguments, they're convinced by them, they're moved by them, but to go out there and then start speaking on them, to start advocating for them, you need to have some kind of understanding. So find people that, for whatever the subject is that you're trying to advocate for, find the people that also advocate for it and listen or read as much of it as you can, get as much as you can, pay attention to the arguments, both on both sides of the equation, and then rephrase those in your own words. Get used to actually saying those. Go to your friends and family that you feel comfortable talking to, and try teaching what you learned to them first before you go out into public. If you can't confidently and clearly communicate to the people that are going to listen to you anyways, you're not ready yet to go out to talk to people who are going to start trying to fight you a fight against it and start asking the hard questions. So educate yourself, put it in your own words so that it gets ingrained into you your way so that you can explain it, and then practice actually explaining it to others.
So let me scare the panel here really quick, because Rudy, this is what the second show that you've done with the ACA, is that right? And Phoenix, you haven't been doing this for that long either. I think I started working with ACA shows just a couple months ago, and then I was working in YouTube on other channels since April. We are someone's veterans. Someone is looking at us and saying, "Wow, I want to be where they are. I want to be as knowledgeable as they are." But you know what? I am absolutely going to show you that we all started from, I don't know what I'm talking about. We all had that moment where we questioned just about everything, and we felt like we knew this much about what there is to know. And speak, get out there. You have your phone and a Wi-Fi connection. Get on YouTube. You can go out there and find the communities of people who are talking about what you want to learn about, and then you can help learn and be a voice for our community. Also, we were all nothing once.
Yeah, the mic on these earbuds used to be my mic for recording videos, and my phone was my camera.
Oh, okay. Well, to wrap this up, let's have a little fun here. And we only have about 5 minutes to have fun with this, but can we have fun with this? What's that last article? Phoenix, this isn't even an article. We can't even call this an article.
No, did we end up getting a clip of the darn thing first off?
I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure like everybody who wants to have seen this clip has seen it. If not, we'll have a link in the description. What are we looking at here?
Oh, we got some footage of Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White Kane,
I hear the
being soundtracked to Eminem with the bobbing cat in the foreground.
I've actually seen other versions of that video set to different music. That was actually the first version of it that I saw, was a different one. But either way, hilarious.
I really, I just saw the thing and I don't have any words for that. It is like, okay.
I do have a couple words, not about the clip itself, but you know how I go. I look at something and I figure, how does this apply globally? And my big take on this is, you know what? I am incredibly grateful to be living in a country where parody and humor like this is considered protected speech, right? We are allowed to criticize our political figures. We are allowed to mock our political figures. And there are some places where they don't have this freedom. I am very grateful that I am in an environment where something like this can even exist. Okay. It's not the funniest. It's cool. It's out there. I question what exactly a spiritual advisor does at the executive branch level. And I suppose that's where this conversation probably should have gone. But my first thought was, you know what? Thank goodness that we have comedians. Thank goodness we have shows where there are, in many cases, brilliant parodies of our elected officials. Rudy, what's your big take?
My big takeaway was that I was proud of the thought that even as a religious person, I would have thought this video was asinine. Like even when I was religious, even when I was fully brainwashed, there was never a time in my life when I would have been like, yes, amen. I would have been like, what is happening right now? Why? Because even as a religious person, I was like waiting for a theocracy to happen after Armageddon. But even then, it's like, okay, I'm currently living in a democracy with separation of church and state. Why even is there a spiritual advisor? And does she legitimately think that the Democrats are not also praying for Biden to win? Like, does she really not think that like, oh, those people are praying to win and I'm praying to win, but God's going to support us? Like why? Why do you think that? What is the point of it? And if you're one of those, you know, God has a plan, everything happens according to God's will thing, what is praying going to do anyway? Like, you're not going to influence his decision. I mean, it just seems asinine from so many different perspectives.
That was a big part of my deconversion, the realizing the futility of intercessory prayer. God's going to do whatever God wants to do anyway, whether or not I pray for it, so why does it matter? Like, that was the big one.
Yeah, I like the George Carlin skit on religion regarding prayers. Like, God's got a divine plan, a perfect plan, and here you come along with wanting to muck it up with your prayer.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
You want him to change his perfect plan.
I wish for everybody who is watching or who was listening to this, because there's a lot of places, you know, where people are they're watching it on YouTube, but they have it as background noise and they're not watching the video, or people who are watching this on Spreaker. For just a moment there, thank you for bringing back George Carlin for us. And if I could have one wish, it would be to have you read that entire thing, because that was spot on. That sounded really, really good. That was awesome. This was a lot of fun tonight, guys. Let's do a quick recap of what you guys had as your big takeaway. Phoenix, let's start with you. What would you like to take away from this show and leave our audience with?
That we live in a country where we are given rights as human beings, rights of free speech, and rights as individuals to be treated as human beings. And that as a democracy, whenever somebody tries to squelch those rights for whatever reason, the people speak up and push back. And we can maintain our freedoms as long as we stand together.
Thanks. Rudy, what would you like to leave our audience with this week?
I think that what I mostly got out of this is, first of all, we do live in a country where, you know, we have all these rights, but in the case we learned from Texas, those rights could kind of just disappear, like if we're not paying attention. And I think the main reason they changed that law back so quickly was probably the backlash that they received. So the fight we have as secular humanists for human rights and a better society is an ongoing one. So don't ever, don't kick your shoes off and take off your coat and be like, "Yep, Biden's been elected. We're good." That's just not. I mean, if that was who you were voting for, I guess. But the point really is just like it's not just like a voting election season is it. You know, it's constant work. And if you were voting libertarian, kick your party in the butt and be like, dude, we never get any votes. What are we doing? Like whatever you're working for, don't stop doing it just because election season's over. Now is not the time to sit on your butts, and don't alienate your allies either.
If I may, I actually have a few quotes for this. We have Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Right.
Albert Einstein repeating this. The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. And Martin Luther King Jr. The silence of the good people is more dangerous than the brutality of the bad people. We keep on having repeats of the same basic concept amongst a lot of well-known advocates for freedom.
Well, my big takeaway from tonight is we talked about all the forbidden topics that you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table. We talked about religion. We talked about politics. The only thing we didn't talk about is in-laws. And I absolutely love my wife's mom's meatloaf. I really do. I promise. But these conversations need to be had. And even you don't have to be a political expert. You don't have to be a theologian to learn how to have these conversations in a respectful way, in a way that everybody feels heard and everybody feels included, without necessarily having it come to blows. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is we're just told, don't talk about this stuff, when really we need to. And I'm really proud to be part of a show that puts out these conversations, and hopefully you guys can continue these conversations throughout the week and in between episodes, even engaging with us. And this is a fantastic segue into other ways that you can engage with us. If you have any comments or questions about any of the topics that we've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. If you put this show in the subject or put Phoenix, Rudy, or myself in there, we'll make sure we get it to everybody. And if you would like to support the show, you can support us at patreon.com/thenonprofits. Guys, it was a genuine pleasure getting to share the show with you guys. This was a lot of fun, and I hope we get to do this again.
Yep, glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.